Hello and welcome to episode 170 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
Thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And when I say we speak to writers of all kinds, normally that's over a series of episodes, but this week we're speaking to someone that has written across a number of different formats.
Yes, we are indeed. We're chatting with the wonderful Alasdair Beckett-King, who has written, as you say, across a number of different media. He's written for video games with Unforeseen Incident. He helped with the translation and the English version of that German game. He's written children's books. Montgomery BonBon, Murder at the Museum, came out in February this year, and his second one's coming out in October. And he's, of course, best known for his stand-up, in which if you have not seen him, go to YouTube and watch some clips. He is very, very funny.
Yeah, we'll put a link to his YouTube channel in the podcast. He's one of these comedians that sort of really hit it big when some of his online skits went big, and they are very, very funny. He produces them all himself, playing multiple characters, often with animation as well and things like that. So definitely worth looking at those if you haven't seen them already. But he was a great guest, very, very funny, and we chat to him about all these different things about, writing comedy, getting into comedy, which is very timely, of course, because it is currently August, which is the month of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. But although, as Alasdair says, he is not at the Fringe this year, and he sounded pretty happy about it.
Yeah,
has to be said. So
if you're upset about that, don't worry. We've actually brought Alasdair to you.
Yes, indeed, yes. So, he tells us about that. He tells us about writing for video games. He's a huge fan of point-and-click video games. And also talks about writing books for kids, which is, as we discussed, it can be quite a difficult line nowhere to pitch, especially if you're writing comedy and things like that. Where do you pitch because it's stuff.
Because normally it's stuff that you write that you find funny yourself, or you find scary yourself. But when you're writing a book for a kid, I'm like, well, how do I know for sure that a kid would like this? I feel that it's difficult.
Or how does will a kid know about this?
Exactly.
All that sort of thing. So we chat to him about all of that.
But we can't have many sex scenes in it. I imagine that's probably the first to get cut out.
I mean, always with the sex, Tarek. One track mind. But I promise you that there's no further discussion of sex in this episode. We will get straight to it after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just a story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
normally on the podcast, I start with the question: did you always want to be a writer? You have, as you were saying just before we started recording, you've written across a number of genres, but I suppose you're best known for being a comedian. Did you always want to be a stand-up comedian?
That's a good question. I'd spent ages trying to be other things than a stand-up comedian. I went to film school. I wanted to write and direct films, and I spent years plugging away at that. And just as I was leaving film school, I did my first stand-up gig. Excuse me, I've just realised we're on my phone's internet, and it's giving me a battery warning, which could...
All right, okay.
Oh, no. Okay, it's plugged in. It's charging now. Oh, okay. Now that's what we call raising the stakes. It's a narrative technique. I did that on purpose to demonstrate.
Incredible.
Yep. Yes, just call me Robert McKee or whatever that guy's name is. Joseph Campbell. I'm the Joseph Campbell of not charging phones, by which I mean I don't charge them in a really bigoted way. No, forget it. Starting again. What was the question?
Did you always want to be a stand-up comedian?
Yes, if I'm being honest, since I first saw a stand-up comedy, probably Billy Connolly, probably aged about 10 or 11, I thought that looks brilliant, and I'd really like to do it. But I was too afraid until I was about 27, 28 to even attempt it. And what I used to do is I used to pitch films with slides and kind of be funny while I was trying to pitch ideas. And I did that several times, or do funny presentations at university, and I liked that a lot. But there's also, you can sort of hide behind the excuse, well, it wasn't meant to be funny, was it? It was just a presentation, it was just a pitch. So if it's funny, that's a bonus. But if it's not funny, there's no risk. Yeah. Whereas if you go up at an open mic or in a comedy gig, then you have to be funny, otherwise it's gone wrong.
And so when did you make that first step into? When did you say, right, I'm going to do this and try and be funny and take that risk?
I was visiting my parents for Christmas, and I had a couple of sort of funny stories that I would tell people. I remember telling someone one of the stories, and I remember her saying, "Oh, you're just so naturally funny." And I thought, I've really worked on that story quite a lot over the, that little anecdote. I've worked it up to the point where it's quite funny now. And that isn't the same thing as being naturally funny. But I've fooled this stranger into thinking I'm funny. So maybe I could do that professionally. Maybe I could expand that instead of doing it on a one-on-one basis. Do it to like 100 or 200 people, and that could work. So over Christmas, I thought of a way of linking all of the stories were like funny things that happened to me in the street, which were basically true stories that I had massaged slightly. I thought, what if I string those together as if they happened all in one go? Because I thought in those days that a 5-minute comedy set had to be narrative. And so I said, the natural way to do this is to base the set on Joyce's Ulysses. And so this is, I know it sounds ridiculously pretentious, but this is how I thought stand-up comedy worked. So I wrote a 5-minute set about purchasing a copy of James Joyce's Ulysses and then trying to get home with it, and various interruptions along the way. I very quickly realised that in a short set, the narrative element is completely extraneous, and you don't need that at all. People are very happy to just have jokes. Annoyingly, I forgot about that for years, and then started trying to write full, longer shows where suddenly people want structure and, if not narrative, at least a sort of musicality to the structure of a show. And that's really annoying because I completely dispensed with it after that first gig. I was like, Joyce, hit the road, you're out.
I mean, I did want to ask about that because looking at your recent stuff, it does tend to have a theme or a story that runs through it, and I wondered, how do you craft that performance? Do you approach it as like, I've got a bunch of jokes I've been working on and I'll pull them together now into this, how can I stitch them together into a story, or do you just have a story first and then try and work out where the gags are on the way?
Well, I am not. And unfortunately, I'm not a storytelling stand-up comedian. And I wish I was. I wish I were, to correctly use the subjunctive, because writers listen to this, I assume. So I'll just correct myself there. Would that I were anecdotalist, but I'm not. I'm not a gag comic, but the stuff I do is based on jokes. So yes, there'll be sort of, here's 5 jokes about this idea, or here's something that's essentially funny about this event that happened. How can I shore that up with other jokes that fit in and observations? And I think the really good storytelling comedians have moments where you're sort of sitting thinking, and what happens next, which is a key part of narrative and drama. That's very rare in stand-up comedy, partly because story, I think, is often about anticipating the outcome, and comedy is often about surprising people with the outcome. And the best comedians play with that, of course. But my shows aren't stories. Some people do a 60-minute story, and I've only done a handful of shows. Maybe I'll learn how to do it. But for now, what I try to do is structure them. I'm learning how to structure. I think I'm getting better at it. I mentioned musicality. I'm not very musical, but I do think about the way albums are structured. A non-concept album still has a kind of shape to it.
Yeah.
And I think a stand-up show is a bit like that. So the jokes about who I am and what I look like, a joke about my appearance, probably going to go at the start of the show when that is new, rather than because you're going to get an awful lot more for I have long red hair. You're going to get an awful lot more for a joke about what you look like if it's at the top than if it comes late. Having said that, there are a few exceptions, but it's more, it's more about thinking about how can I trick the audience into having a sense of closure and satisfaction. And there are a variety of techniques for that, which I think are largely narrative-esque, but they're not narrative, I think. Like after my last show, someone very nicely came to chat afterwards and sort of said, I enjoyed it. It seemed like it was just a whole load of random things, but then it all came together at the end. It's like,
nice.
So that is exactly what I was trying. The second part of that, where it came together at the end, is exactly what I have spent months slaving over, because it is just a collection of bits and observations. But I'm trying to present it to you with an aesthetic coherence.
Yeah, but like you said, with that those first stories that you sort of crafted and made better, and even with that show, you're how long does it take you to put something together like that? How long does it take to write that and sort of work everything up to a standard that you're happy to go out and perform?
I think I'm a very slow writer in general. I was very, very slow when it came to stand-up comedy. A lot of people really threw themselves at it more quickly. I was way, way too cautious. I think the thing about comedy is that it takes a lot of time to get better, and people are very, very slow to give you opportunities and breaks. And if there are milestones in stand-up comedy. Have you got a good 5? Have you got a competition 5 that you can do in competitions? Have you got a 10? Because if you've got 10, then you can do open spots. Have you got 20? Because then they might actually give you a paying gig. Can you write an hour? Can you write another hour? Or why say an hour? In my case, it's 53 minutes and a lot of smiling. Never done more than 53 minutes. Don't tell anyone. It's fine. People are happy. So just stop then. But I've slightly forgotten what the question was.
Which was about like how long you're sort of working and honing this stuff, and how long it gets to.
Yeah. And with that, I got sort of stuck in a 5 and a 10 that was quite good, and it's so hard to get out of that. And I finally got a 20. It's so hard to get out of that. The thing that I realized is that you should be stretching yourself. Like if you're a relatively new comedian and you say, hey, can I get a 10 spot? They'll be like, yeah, you can in 6 months' time. Mm-hmm. If you're in a city like London. So you should be asking for the 10 spot before you've got a 10, because it's going to take months for you to do it. And by the time that, I would do the Fringe, doing sort of little shows, multi-hander shows with friends, thinking, okay, well, I'll do 20 in that show and that will be a big stretch. But by the time it comes around, I've got 20 and it's easy. Mm-hmm. And so every time I should have been reaching further and trying to do, 25% more than I thought I had to stretch it, because it's too easy to be conservative, I think. So I'm always fighting against being a slow writer and sort of natural conservative. Small c, I hasten to add.
And
not politically.
I mean, when you say about writing a kind of 5, 10, 20-minute slot. How do you know when it's ready? How do you test material on family and friends? How do you know when you've polished or what tweaks you need to make to something?
That's a good point. Stand-up comedy is very different, I think, to pretty much everything else, because you just do it in front of an audience and they give you the feedback.
Yeah.
Which would make every other form of writing way easier, I think. Yes, I sort
Although
of think
it's scarier that way, though.
it is scary.
Yes, absolutely.
It is scarier. Yeah. But the audience is, you might try something out on a friend or someone you're working with. You might try it out at a new material night or an open mic night. Real audiences. Now that I've been doing it a little while, I can put on work in progress shows and get a handful of people along to a work in progress show if I do it at a comedy festival, and that's very helpful because the vibe of that is quite different. It's supportive, but at the same time you can tell something that works, and you can tell something that these people are being very kind, but that's not a joke.
Is it obvious sometimes? I mean, obviously, as you say, it's obvious when something isn't working, but is it obvious how to make it work? Where the fix is, or is it a case of scrap the whole thing? No, not at all. And if I can give you an example, a joke that is I've had for quite a while. It's out there on the internet in a few forms. I have a bit about vegan proverbs. And it's a joke, in fact, that pretty much every vegan comedian I know at some point has written. But as far as I know, I wrote it first, so I'm still doing it. But it's a very obvious joke. Like all jokes that are based on phrases, inevitably other people are going to think of them. But it's just about all of the phrases that don't work if you're a vegan. Like if you're a vegan, you can't have a bird in a hand. You can't kill two birds with one stone. And then I do a big long list of them. And I say, it's just you can't give advice if you're a vegan. I'll give you an example of some vegan advice. You can't make an omelette. And that's it. You just can't make an omelette. It's a very scary one to do over Zoom, that, because the lag means that you don't laugh at the point that you should laugh. And I get scared. So it's quite funny. I'm not doing it better. I've done it better than that, but that's an example.
No,
of a joke.
don't take the lag as
you can edit.
We're just very
edit the
stupid.
Laughs. Just up the gain a little bit on the laughs to make it sound.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I in my notebooks had just a list of sayings that don't work if you're a vegan, including you can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs, and I think I had it written down as like you can't make an omelette at all, or something like that, and it was just in the list, and it wasn't a bit because it didn't have a punchline, and it was only when I realized I didn't invent the hanging sentence, the sentence that people expect to be finished that isn't. It's an hoary old device, but only when I realized that that's how that becomes a joke. It's exactly the same words, and it's exactly the same concept, but rearranged it's funny, and unrearranged it's not funny.
When we've spoken to other comedians as well, they say that it's sometimes hardest to get feedback from fellow comedians in a way, because you can tell something that's really funny and the comedian will just sit there and go, that works. Good. Yeah.
Yes. And famously, the time that you'll hear a laugh from the back of the room is when it's going wrong. The things that will amuse your colleagues, friends and rivals will be you saying something you really shouldn't have, or really putting your foot in it on stage, or trying something that there's just no way you're going to get that across. That's the kind of thing that will please the what I'm saying is all comedians apart from me are horrible, horrible, cruel people.
And you've sort of, I guess, start to build your profile not just with the stand-up, but also with sort of sketches that you've put on social media and things like that. Is that a new and good route for would-be comedians to try and take?
Well, I know nothing about the TikTok, but it does seem to be a big deal. The old TikTok. I'm on Twitter, which used to be a big deal, and I think won't be very soon, and YouTube, and who knows what's going to happen with YouTube. I think the experience that I had of doing skits and sketches and building up my profile a little bit through that is probably quite unique to lockdown.
Right, okay.
So I was doing it before lockdown to an audience of no one. And during lockdown, I was lucky enough to have a few videos go sort of semi-viral and built a little following off the back of that and got various sort of career opportunities off the back of that again, including... and I don't know whether getting to do a little bit of telly was a direct consequence of it, but I bet it was. And the series of books that I'm in the middle of writing now also came out of a series of videos that I made during the first lockdown, I think. So really, the pandemic worked out delightfully for me personally. It was hugely successful, but I sort of feel like, well, yes, obviously, if you're a comedian, you should have an online profile these days, I think, and plugging away on the circuit is absolutely something you should do, but you should probably also be doing funny TikToks as well, because why wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. Being snobbish about that, I think, is a mistake. But I don't think there's a recipe for it. I don't think you can say, well, this person did that, and so I'll do this, because I alluded to the fact that Twitter is collapsing as a platform, because what works one year in the world of the internet and social media might not work the next year.
And it's funny because when we speak to like authors and stuff, they talk about timing and luck just being their manuscript lands on the desk of the right person at the right time that's looking for something like that. And it sounds like it's similar with comedy. We spoke with Michael Spicer, and he talked about how his Man in the Room Next Door, he put it out late one night, and then suddenly it got, he didn't even expect it to go anywhere really, and then suddenly obviously it's become this huge thing. So
absolutely. I mean, my experience was similar. I put a video on Twitter in 2021. Someone stole it and put it on Reddit, and whoever that person was, I'm very grateful to them, because it hit the front page of Reddit, and I gained hundreds of thousands of followers. Well, sorry, I gained in that week I gained tens of thousands of followers on Twitter and YouTube, and those tens eventually became 100, not hundreds, but 100 of followers / subscribers, which is small fry in terms of YouTube influencer numbers, but medium fry by the standard of jobbing comedian. So I was that was very weird and unexpected, but I didn't make it happen. I still can't tell you why that video is so much more funny than everything else I've ever done. I don't think that it is, but it is, I guess, factually. I just have to accept that.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to ask you about other forms of writing you've done, starting with Unforeseen Incident, which was a video game which came out in 2018. It was a point-and-click adventure game, a German release. But am I right in saying you helped with the English translation? You gave new kind of dialogue for that?
Essentially, I co-wrote it. It was not my story or my title or my characters, but I worked with Marcus Baumer, who is the lead dev and writer of Backwoods, who made that game. And essentially, we wrote it together. So when point-and-click adventure games, I'm a huge fan and always have been. And they're still sort of big in Germany. There's still sort of a market for them, and a lot of the German ones are translated poorly into English. Now, I don't speak German, so I can't translate from German to English, much to my shame. So what we did was Marcus would write about half the game in English, and I wrote about the other half of the game in English. And I rewrote his English to naturalize it, even though his English is excellent. And then he translated my English and his English into German.
Right.
So there is no original language. It's as English as it is German.
Okay.
In terms of the writing. So about half the lines probably were originally German, and he translated them into English for me, and the other half were originally English, and he translated into the German. We don't know whether it's an English game or a German game in terms of its native language.
Yeah.
And how did that come about? How did you get involved in writing that?
Well, I'd written a couple of point and clicks of my own, and one of them was published by Application Systems Games, based in Heidelberg. Application Systems Heidelberg, or ASH Games, depending on how you say that. And they picked up Marcus's game, and basically their publisher sort of said, maybe you should get this British guy to work on the script. So I don't know whether I was forced upon them as a condition of we'll publish you, but you have to work with this guy. But it's very nice working on it's very nice to work on someone else's story, I think, because in some ways you're not so responsible for the big difficult plot beats. You're just there to maybe give some sort of feedback and try and be the audience for some bits. So we go, okay, I think I'd understand this better if I found that out earlier, and just to try and sort of tighten things up. It's just so much more fun to try and improve something than it is to have to create it from scratch.
Yeah. And is that something you'd like to do more of going forward? Is that
I've done it on a few other games. I'd love to do it. I've never been in a writer's room for a telly thing. I'd really like to do that. Obviously, like most comedians, I've got unpublished sitcom pilot scripts and treatments sitting in a virtual drawer on my computer. But yeah, I do think punching up, I think, is what they call it for comedy.
Yeah,
I do think I'd love to do that. But I do worry though that perhaps my tone and interests aren't broad enough. I think I'd be really good at that as long as we were working in an area I was interested in. But
I can see it working really well for a point and click. That kind of Tim Schafer, Double Fine.
Oh, huge fan
vibe,
of Tim Schafer.
That it kind of fits that kind of classic mold really well. The kind of Monkey Island games, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I love those games, and I don't think it's being nostalgic to say that. I think in terms of the quality of the writing and design, I think they were better than some of the things that came afterwards. I think.
Well, yeah.
It to some extent, perhaps it's because in a sense they were AAA games at the time. And I include myself in this. Those of us who have tried to sort of imitate that are missing the fact that those games were absolutely top of the line games at the time, but also were pushing things forward in lots of ways. So things that I'd be playing some German adventure game in 2003 and going, why is this so annoying? Like this dead end. I've run into a dead end in a game. It's like LucasArts fixed all of they solved all of these problems 5 years ago, but somehow they've come back.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, another kind of writing that you've just released your first book, Montgomery BonBon, Murder at the Museum. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, I do, actually, yes. The listeners should buy it, is what I have to say. So that came out of a lockdown video. I did an interactive murder mystery which I called a Who Did It, where for a week I played a variety of characters in a sort of Agatha Christie parody, and it was a properly worked out murder mystery, and you could vote and make choices, but essentially you could try and work out who did it. I eventually bunged the whole thing up on YouTube, so you can still watch it, but you can't play along, but you can still guess who did it. And Walker Books, an editor at Walker Books, Grania, got in touch with me off the back of that, and we started having conversations, and I was convinced that it wasn't going to go anywhere, and it took a long time before it did. But I've now published one whodunit for it's a middle grade book, which means it's 9 to 12. But I always think it sounds like it means it's sort of okay. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Which I'm happy with, because if you can achieve sort of okay, then I think you win. It's middle grade, and the next one will be out. I've literally a few days ago sent off, I think, the almost final draft. I haven't written final in capital letters on the Word document yet, so it might not be final. But and there'll be, I think, a couple more after that as well. So the premise is that Bonnie Montgomery, a 10-year-old girl, is a brilliant detective, but in order to be able to solve crimes, she has to disguise herself as Montgomery BonBon, who is a sort of knockoff Poirot except she can't do the accent as well. So his language and his accent slide all over the place. But she does wear a big fake moustache, a raincoat, and a beret as she fools the adults around her while also solving murders.
Excellent.
And I mean, was writing a book something you'd always wanted to do? Was that kind of a goal you'd like to have tried at some point, or was this kind of out of the blue, a new challenge for you?
It'd be extremely arrogant of me to say that I didn't want to write a book, wouldn't it? And I was forced to do it when the opportunity arose. The concept had been around. I didn't know, the idea of Montgomery BonBon. What I wanted to do was sort of a Jonathan Creaky kind of impossible crime story for kids or a family audience, and I didn't know if that was is that like an animated thing that I should be pitching, or is it TV? Mm-hmm. It's like is it live action? I was toying with the idea when I spoke to first time that conversation with Walker, and since it came off the back of a whodunnit, I was like, well, I do actually have ideas for kids' books that I didn't realize what might be a book. It hadn't occurred to me, which I realise is again another example of sort of either serendipity or privilege, because it's really hard to get that conversation with an editor at a publishing house. There are people with beautifully polished manuscripts who can't get people to read them, and so I feel like I sort of cheated. And jumped the line a little bit, as an American might say.
It came off the back of all the work you'd been doing, so in that sense, it's not like you had that meeting after one idea that you had.
No, it's not like I didn't just phone up somebody I was at boarding school with. Or
exactly.
I didn't go to boarding school, just to be clear. That's why I'm saying it in a sarcastic voice. No, but at the same time, I do feel a certain degree of anxiety. Well, I was plugging it on my YouTube channel inevitably, and someone said, "Good luck with this. It sounds good, but I as a matter of principle, I don't buy celebrity kids' books." Mm. And I didn't reply, but I wanted to say, I'm not a celebrity. Just because you follow me on YouTube doesn't make me a celebrity. Celebrities are famous. I'm not famous. Think about it. You have to understand how much less money I have than the people you think of as celebrities. At the same time, I've got 100 times more Twitter followers than other people who are starting out as children's authors, and that's I don't know whether that's something that publishers or literary agents take into account, but I suspect it is, because we had convinced ourselves that Twitter was very important for a while. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that's a little platform that I suppose I've built myself through hard work, but equally could be stripped away at any moment at the whim of a billionaire. But yeah, I feel a little bit cheeky, so I really have worked hard on it. That was the
go and buy your book. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and also buy the book, because I really did. I thought I can't just dash this off now, because I feel like I've been a little bit cheeky getting this opportunity. So I better really commit to it and put as much effort into it as I can.
I wanted to ask about when you're writing a children's book like this, how do you know the right level to pitch it at? Because I imagine it's easy to write something. Well, I imagine it's easier to write something for someone like of my age, because I know what is too advanced or not advanced enough. But when you're writing for someone of a different age group, how do you get it so it's not too advanced but not too simple? And how do you get that sweet spot?
I think it's a serious concern, and there are sort of probably pedagogical answers. I don't know. There are people who know about children's development who can answer with some kind of authority there. But I think when we're talking about middle grade, I think children are enjoying, I think, fairly complex stories and quite rich language. I rely heavily on the editor being able to say, kids won't know what that is.
Yeah.
And just respect that and go, okay, well, I'll replace it with something that they will know what it is.
Yeah.
If it's but I would rather throw in slightly obscure, colourful or archaic language and then have the editor go, no, this needs explaining, than not try it. So the first book has taxidermied animals, which are combined versions of different animals, like the flamingopotamus, I think, and chimpanzee zebra, which were originally called chimera or chimera. I never know how to pronounce it aloud. So partly to make it easier on me when doing the audiobook, they're not called that in the published version of the novel. They're called monsters because it's an easier word. But I think actually there's a lesson for stand-up, because like you can't have a punchline that hinges on a really obscure bit of language that might confuse people. But you often can throw in something that not everybody necessarily understands in the setup, because as long as context, or setups often involve repetition, because you want to reinforce an idea before you subvert it. So there's often a sort of a 1-2 in a setup, saying the same thing twice using synonyms, and one of those can be really fruity or obscure, as long as the punchline brings it all together.
Yeah.
And so I sort of think it's that. Like you can include a word that the readership, that might be the first time they're going to read it, but they'll probably read it a few more times. If context is telling you what that means, then it's still enriching it. I hope.
Yeah. No, that,
I'm a new writer for children, so I'm on book 2, but I they're quite short, but it still took me ages. So I think I'm learning these things as I go.
But I mean, you've sort of spoken about it a bit there, but how does your process for writing a book differ from writing for a video game, differ from writing stand-up? Or does it? What are the similarities and what are the differences between?
That's a great question. Stand-up is the most different, because with stand-up you have sort of an idea, and the more experience you get as a comedian, the closer you get to just saying it as you thought of it on stage. So I think if you're less experienced, you probably spend more time sort of honing it and honing it and honing it, and then trying it out, which I think can be dangerous, because then you might have polished something which should not be or could not be polished. I'm not going to use the word turd, but sometimes it's annoying to have. Some people come to the stage with new material that is already a finely wrought routine. So this is just me, but I sort of want to see if the essence of it is funny. So I want to try out with the smallest expenditure of energy. I want to say just the nuggets, the kernel of the joke, and if that's funny, then I might start trying to build on it. Video games writing is highly transactional and highly interactive. So for the most part, I think Dave Gilbert, who publishes develops as Wagitai Games. So if you're into point and clicks, you'll probably know his indie games. Unavowed was one of the big smashes of 2019, I think, sort of an indie hit. I think his rule is something like you get 5 or 7 lines of dialogue before the player gets to do something, if you're in a conversation. And I think there is a tendency in visual novels and games around 1999 to have loads and loads of long cutscenes. Yeah, where people have conversations and you just sit there twiddling your mouse or whatever. Yeah, and I don't think that's right. But writing within that, okay, this is a little burst of interactivity, and then the player gets to add their spin on it, and then there's another little burst of interactivity, and then the player gets to add their spin on it, is quite different. And in point and click games we don't have barks, which are the thing writers spend a lot of the time writing for games, which are things characters say as they're just wandering around. Right. Yeah. Many of which are end up being quite risible, because it's sort of a funny concept that people would just go around saying things like, "Thought I heard a squirrel. Must have been the wind." And it's hard to come up with ones of those that aren't ridiculous. So full respect to the writers who have to write them. In point and click games, you have to interact with the world, which is a great opportunity for jokes, because you can treat whatever the artist has created as the setup and try and come up with a punchline just based on what is this object. Which is a lovely way to do it, rather than writing and then having the art created, sort of having the world there and being able to respond to it. And what we tried to do with Unforeseen Incidents specifically was, this is a point-and-click game, so people are going to examine It's a single-click game, which means you don't have a complicated interface, but you can't. What we thought is, okay, well, if you tap once on something, then you'll get a sort of a superficial response, and if you tap again, you'll get a second level of interaction with that. So that one's more likely to be a joke as well. And we want the things you interact with to tell you something about character of the protagonist, who is a sort of a like many adventure game protagonists. He's sort of an everyman schmo. He's a repair guy. He likes to fix things, and he has low self-esteem, which is why he's stuck in a crappy apartment in a dead end town. And think, okay, well, then everything in this town is going to. He's been here for years, so everything's going to remind him of a story. So as you go around, various objects, the seat in the bar reminds him of a thing that happened, and that's a funny story, which only comes out through a few lines. I'm not really in this answer demonstrating economy of writing that I'm talking about. I'm actually quite verbose here, but. Yeah, so it's thinking about how can every interaction be either moving the story forwards, maybe this background object can give us a hint about what the player is supposed to do, or telling us something about character, or just being funny and entertaining in its own right, just a good piece of writing. And actually, that's hard to do, but it's very compartmentalized. So it's like, okay, well, what's interesting about this washing machine? And you just sit there and try and think of something that would be interesting about the washing machine, because if you play these sorts of games, if you play poorer quality games, and I'm not claiming to be an expert, I get very, very irritated when the player character says something like, "That's my car." It's like, well, I can see that, or it's a post box. It's like, well, why did you pay an actor to say that? Because the artist has created a post box. This is information I had.
Yeah, but with books, then each one has its own sort of different process and different pressure on you as a writer, I guess. Because with a stand-up, you're almost entirely on your own. With the video games, you're working with other people, as you say. That's the most sort of collaborative, interactive.
Certainly, yes, it's very.
And with a book, you're on your own. Except that when you give it to your editor, you'll start to get feedback and things like that. So, I mean, is there a process that you prefer, or do you enjoy doing all of them in their own way?
I think writing a book is the loneliest and the most solitary of the lot, because you have an audience with stand-up, and they're being your editor, or you're editing, but they're giving you the little notes that and feedback, and we're so needy as comedians that we're constantly. It's like if you had an editor for your book, and every sentence you were sort of texting it to them, going like, "Huh? Huh? What do you think of that?" Which, to be fair to my editor, I have done a bit, a little bit of like, "Is this funny?" It's really nerve-wracking, and like most good-hearted people, I had always despised authors and found them to be insufferably pretentious, and had very little patience for the hashtag writing. It's what martyrs we are, spending all day sitting in front of a computer. It doesn't sound that hard, I thought. Having done it, though, it actually is really bloody hard. So I now respect writers.
Yeah,
and I mean, you're obviously working. How was it working with an illustrator? And what kind of interplay did you have with them? What did they come on at the same time as you? Did they come on after you'd written the book? How does that work?
Claire Powell is the illustrator of the book, and I can draw. So and I do bits of animation. So what I didn't want to do was be precious and uptight about how I had seen things in the book, because I visualized things quite strongly and clearly, and I didn't want to be a nightmare collaborator. So one of the really nice things about the I don't know how other publishers work. Walker maintained a degree of distance between between me as the writer and Claire as the illustrator. So I wasn't speaking to her directly, saying things like, "Make the glasses bigger. He should be taller," and giving those sorts of awful notes. what was nice about it is that creates the possibility for me to be surprised as she sort of finds new jokes and funny angles on things that I had written without me knowing it. And someone complimented me on a joke in the book the other day. I think a kid said they really liked it, and I was like, "Thank you very much." And they remembered that I didn't write it, and it's a joke from inside one of the drawings. So it's completely Claire's work. But I was totally happy. But in a way that doesn't matter. It sort of does matter, but it doesn't matter because the book is an entity, and I also think that the illustrations are a way for the children on the younger end of middle grade to be able to enjoy it. Like, friends have read it to kids who are sort of 8, which I think it's a bit young for actually having a murder in the book. But the illustrations are a way of if the language is a barrier, the illustrations are a way into the book. I think, but they're more than that. There are illustrations that make me laugh. Like there's just really funny, hilarious elements in the drawings that have sprung from the imagination of the illustrator, and that's nice, isn't it? Not trying to get an illustrator whose job is to produce something from my brain and tease it out, but for her to create something herself.
Well, yeah, that it becomes more of a collaborative thing at the end of the day, like that. It's like when we've spoken with comic writers as well. They'll write the script, but they'll often be quite hands off in terms of what the artist will bring, and sometimes be surprised by what the artist does generally in a positive way, I think.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, with it being a whodunit, obviously sometimes I have to go, no, that door has to be on the other side of the room because for some tedious mechanical plot reason it can't be there, and I can't expect the illustrator to have a god's eye view of how all the different pieces fit together, because I struggle to half the time. But I mean, in the second book, there's a little building at the edge of a beach, which is a sort of excise house, a causeway on an island where they check for contraband entering or leaving the island. And the excise is one of the words that the kids are going to learn when they read the book, because nobody knows the word excise. The illustrator came back and the house is on stilts. So I was like, okay, well, I think I'm going to have to mention that in the text, because I had not imagined the house being on stilts. But the house being on stilts, it makes perfect sense because this is a causeway, so the tide comes in. So what do they do? When you think about it, it's not only logical, it's also comical. And so, of course, they have to be clattering up and down a wooden staircase to get in and out of the house on little wooden stilts, which is a wonderful invention that I, in the future, look forward to taking credit for.
And does writing across these different formats, is that good for you as a sort of creative person? Is it nice to, I'm going to do some stand-up, I'm going to write a book, or would you prefer to be concentrating in one area?
Well, they say a change is as good as a rest, although the last few months has been quite busy. So, frankly, I wouldn't mind giving a rest a go. I really enjoy being able to switch from one project to another, because I do find that refreshing, and I'm better at that than I am at sitting down not doing anything. I'm not the listener can't hear how ginger I am, but I'm not a sunbather. However white you're imagining I am, it's more than that. I don't sunbathe, but I find it difficult to do it within a day, and that's where what I found challenging. Spending all day writing and then going to do new material as a comedian, which I've done several times in the last few weeks, in the last couple of months. I had a sort of a ridiculous week where I had to do the first date of my tour, so that means learning an older show, as well as updating the old show. I had to, my first a work in progress for a completely new show, so having to do about 45 to 50 minutes of new jokes, which I had not written, and the launch of the book. And I shouldn't complain, because these are all good things. Like getting to do my first little UK tour is a wonderful, sort of milestone. And this might be the high point of my career, so I should enjoy it. But having to do all of the elements of it in the same week was hard work, and I was riding on adrenaline for a lot of that. and I would like to apologise to the people at the Work in Progress show who were extremely patient with some very, very not developed material, but it did last 45 minutes. So
that's
contractually, that's all I'm obliged to give for a Work in Progress show.
I mean, would you want to move into the world of film and TV? Write stuff for other mediums?
Well, that's what I always wanted to do. That's what I got into all of these other things, trying to work out how to be a movie director. I wanted to be Terry Gilliam, and it didn't work. So I've still got the ideas. I've still got the, like I say, the screenplays that are not doing anything. I would love to do that, and annoyingly, I'm realizing that there's the old Mark Twain saying about the saying, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket," which, by the way, you can't do if you're a vegan. The Mark Twain version of that is put all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket. Which, what he's saying, like, if you want to be a writer, just be a writer. Which I think is good advice. However, you get to meet interesting people by doing interesting things. Mm-hmm. And you get interesting opportunities by being good at doing anything. And it irritates me as much as anyone else that people who aren't from a filmmaking background keep getting Arts Council funding to make films. Like, maybe give them to people who went to film school instead of people who went to art school, or actors. Why should actors be allowed to direct anything? That I can be as petty as anyone else. But I think the reason is that it's doing stand-up, you meet interesting people doing stand-up, and you meet interesting people going to open mics in stand-up, and then 10 years later, they're not doing stand-up anymore, but they're doing something else, which is interesting. And you can, I was going to say phone them up, but we're millennials. You can message them on Twitter if that still exists. I don't know. I probably would have made more money if when I was 20, I thought, right, I'm going to be an animator, and just stuck to that. Or some, if I just said, right, I'm going to do one of the things I'm interested in and commit to it and not do anything else to the exclusion of everything else. As it is, I've done whatever I was interested in and whatever I had the opportunity to do at every turn. So my flat is probably smaller than it would be if I'd put all my eggs in one basket and watched that basket. But I don't regret just only doing work that I was interested in, because I feel lucky. How many people get to mostly do things that interest them for their lives?
Absolutely.
That's what an incredible what incredible privilege to be able to do things that I'm interested in.
And so we've got the first Montgomery BonBon book not long out. Go and buy it. We'll stress that again.
Pause the podcast and buy it now.
The second one you've just handed in, is that out next year then? Is it on a yearly?
Later this year.
Later this year.
Yes. Nice. Yes, the next one should be out in September, October time, I think.
Right. Okay.
Depending on how many spelling mistakes are still in it at this point, I think. Quite a lot. I was very tired. But no, it is good, honestly. I have worked hard on it. I keep forgetting that I'm supposed to be selling it. I keep being honest by mistake. I'm really enjoyed working on them. I have.
Excellent.
It's just been
and your tour when's that on until?
That's a UK tour with a couple of dates in Scotland, Edinburgh and Glasgow, in May, I think.
Cool.
Mostly around England, and a couple of dates in Northern Ireland, Belfast and Derry.
Are you coming back to the Fringe this year?
And I'm not, and I can't even hold back the smile. I'm skipping the Edinburgh Festival Fringe this year, which is a shame, because I genuinely do enjoy it, but it's also great because I also hate it. Like all comedians, we love it and we hate it. So hopefully next year, but not this year.
Excellent.
Nice.
What was the last book that you read?
The last book that I finished. I should mention I've got a really terrible memory, and people who come to see me on tour will see that there are sheets of paper next
Scattered
to
all over.
I can remember now. I've just got a bedside lamp, so I could read. I read an awful lot of short, impossible crimes. Part of the Lizard collection, I think it's called. It's like 1,000 of them. I didn't read all of them. But the last novel I read was Susanna Clarke's Piranesi.
Piranesi.
Yeah.
Yes, which as a video gamer, I'm like, this is very familiarly in sort of Mist and Riven territory. Like if you,
cool. It's
I sort
of to read still.
Well, yeah, I don't want no spoilers then from me, but I suspect it's being read by a public who haven't played video games, and if you read it from I have no idea whether the author is a gamer, but it feels like a story that's been that could easily work in an interactive medium.
Nice. What about the last film that you watched?
The last film I watched was, I think, Alphaville, but I did watch that for another podcast, so I had seen it before. So I watched it to revise Alphaville.
What is Alphaville again?
Jean-Luc Godard's 1965 sort of bricolage sci-fi made of...
not the film I was thinking of.
No. But I it would be that, or it would be some 1930s whodunit throwback that I've been watching for research. I've been watching an awful lot of whodunits lately, and not catching up on as many highbrow films as I should have. But Alphaville's a good answer. That's sophisticated. That's new wave.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily represent what I would have been watching.
What about the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
I've been watching Link and Williams. Is it Williams and Link? I can't remember. The producers of Columbo and Murder, She Wrote. I've been watching their Ellery Queen from 1971.
Okay, cool.
Which is not exactly undeservedly forgotten, not quite deservedly forgotten. It's got some good episodes and it's got its merits, but you can sort of see why it didn't get a second series.
I've never heard of that. Was it called?
It's Ellery Queen, and it's not really an adaptation of the Ellery Queen whodunit short stories. Most of them are original stories, and it's extremely unfaithful to the short stories I've read in terms of character. But the nicest thing about it for me is it keeps the thing that they had as on the radio series, which presumably those writers would have grown up listening to in the 40s and 50s, which is at the key moment in the story, the narrator or Ellery Queen turns to you and says, "Have you worked it out? You've got all the clues."
Okay. Cool.
And they have Jim Hutton, the lead actor, literally turn to camera and say, "I think I've got it. Have you worked it out?" Because as you match wits with Ellery Queen, and that sort of gamified element, I appreciate. I did enjoy the. It's all whodunits at the moment. Anthony Horowitz's
is that for
Magpie Murders
research,
on the BBC.
or do you just enjoy watching?
I do like a whodunit, but it's I may be on a bit of a kick at the moment, as they say. And but the last one we watched was the Hugh Laurie's adaptation of Why Didn't They Ask Evans, which they just did on ITV.
Oh, right.
Nice.
I've seen that.
Which is, I think, both of those, Magpie Murders and Why Didn't They Ask Evans, benefit enormously from being multi-episode stories, which are one story, which are a whodunit, which don't have previously ons at the start.
Yeah.
Because the previously on, as we all know, is the murder mystery killer. Because you want to slip in. It's like the incidental thing where that guy from the first episode who you didn't remember. Here he is in the last
Why
week.
do you need to remember him? Yeah.
Why is he there?
Exactly.
That's
I've had that
bit
thought
suspicious.
so many times with watching these types of shows where you think, well, obviously this is a major character because they've brought him back in this recap scene, and now it's going to ruin it for me. Yeah, absolutely.
It's like watching Seven now, and you just go, "Why was Kevin Spacey playing that reporter?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that was weird.
It's obviously him.
I just wish I hadn't brought up Kevin Spacey, but it's too late now. I enjoyed those, and also it's nice to have a humorous whodunit with actual jokes in it, because I think I think a lot of as cozy crime becomes more popular, and I'm aware I'm contributing to it, but I'm doing my best to actually be funny while I do that. I think it's easy to lean on sort of humorous music and whimsy rather than actual jokes and funny dialogue.
What did you think of the Knives Out films? Have you seen both of them?
I really enjoyed those. I think the first is perhaps my favourite, although that might just be an aesthetic preference for creaky old houses rather than sort of murder under the sun. The second one is an obvious homage, which is how writers pronounce homage, to The Last of Sheila, which is an undeservedly forgotten whodunit. I think 1974. Stephen Sondheim and Anthony Perkins wrote it.
Yeah, because it was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, Glass Onion, and I hadn't realised.
Oh, I didn't realise that, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
And it was adapted because it was so similar to...
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
That'd be the lawyers saying, yeah, you didn't...
Yeah, exactly.
It's a little bit similar. That's well worth watching. Very... it has that sort of don't look now quality of... being shot on location in Europe and the sound quality being absolutely appalling as a consequence. like there's 9 Italians arguing next to the microphone and Donald Sutherland's way over there. I don't know how we're supposed to hear what is being said. That's Don't Look Now, and Last of Sheila has a very similarly shaky production quality, but very, very. It has really, really dated in some ways. And I think those are very interesting, and I don't mean that as a criticism of the film, but I can't go into it without spoilers.
Okay,
nice. But it's funny, it's witty, it's a terrific whodunit in its own right. You know, there's a clue presented. I saw it and I did not realise, and it's got one of those proper yes, of course moments. So it's very, very good, and weird and satirical and interesting to watch in parallel with Glass Onion as a sort of satire of appalling Hollywood types.
Well, the very, very last thing we do is a super quick fire either or, and I always say in these ones there's no right answer apart from perhaps one of them, but we'll start off with Grim Fandango or Monkey Island.
Oh, I can't. Can I? Okay, it's gonna. Are we talking about the original Monkey Island or the whole Monkey Island series?
Let's go for the original Monkey Island.
The original Monkey Island. Okay, in that case, it's Grim Fandango because Monkey Island 2 is the more accomplished game.
Have you played the new one?
I haven't yet because I am afraid that I might not like it.
Yeah, fair enough.
I haven't yet.
TV or cinema?
Well, I would always have said cinema, but lockdown has changed me, and I've watched so many TV whodunits that I think I might be a TV boy. Oh no, I thought I was highbrow. I thought it was an intellectual.
You still watch your French avant-garde films on the TV. It's okay.
You can actually, yes.
Night owl or early bird?
Night owl, please. The morning, you can keep your mornings. People don't get into stand-up comedy because we like getting up early.
That's right. Music or no music when you're writing?
I know it's frowned upon. I hate working in silence. I hate just listening to the computer fan or the sound of traffic or rain. So I do like to listen to nondescript or thematically appropriate music if I can. I can't have lyrics or anything like that. But music. I'm really slowing down this quickfire round, aren't I?
The last one, real book or ebook?
Real book, please.
Unfortunately, the correct answer was ebook. They've invalidated.
Was it? Are ebooks correct?
Delete the episode,
days?
Marco.
Okay.
No, I always just pick ebook because no one ever picks ebook, and I feel sorry for them. So
I know what you mean. I've come round to having previously been a snob. And now being perfect, I've sort of evolved on my position on ebooks and audiobooks and all the rest of it. You know, as I've I do a podcast about folklore, and that means finding old texts on archive.org and reading PDFs and looking at old JPEGs, and it's like it doesn't really matter any of that, does it? It's as long as people are reading stories.
Yeah,
you can read with your ears or your eyes. Yeah. Getting too attached to the medium is, the physicality of whether it's a book is a sort of a form of snobbishness, isn't it? It's a
Yeah,
way
I
of
think so.
signaling
Yeah, it's probably
your,
true.
your
That's
superiority.
That's a good point. Yeah. That was a great chat. Really, really enjoyed that. A really nice guy. Very funny. And
great fun.
interesting what he says about the difference between stand-up and writing stand-up comedy and writing books. Is that kind of immediate impact or immediate feedback you get from the audience when you're trying material out. You know immediately if it's working or not, whereas with the book it's much longer.
Yeah, which I suppose is good and bad in some ways, as we discussed.
Yeah. If it's crashing, burning, you'll find it
exactly.
quick.
But yeah, it's very different skill set, I think, writing across these different things, and even for video games as well. As he says, you've got in those sorts of video games, you've got like a short time in between the player doing things to try and get the story or point across, kind of a thing. So, it must be good having that sort of different variety in your creative life.
Oh,
I think.
yeah, definitely.
So, thanks very much to Alasdair for coming on. The first Montgomery BonBon book, Murder at the Museum, is now out, and as he said, go and buy it. Buy it for yourself or buy it for your sons or daughters or nephews or nieces. And the next one is out in October as well. So yeah, thanks for coming on again, Alasdair. And next week we've got another great guest.
Yeah, next week we've got a very exciting guest, the legend that is Mr. Dean Koontz.
Yes.
Very massive name in the kind of horror-y, dark thriller genre. Yeah, I was certainly quite a big fan of him when I was growing up. It was that kind of. I remember it was him and Stephen King were the two. That kind of similar area they kind of wrote in that kind of dark thriller genre.
Yeah, and I think I always associate Dean Koontz particularly with the sort of great twists at the end of his stories.
Yes, yeah.
And we talked to him about that actually, about about whether he plans those twists or whether they come as he's writing the book. But yeah, it was amazing getting the opportunity to speak to someone like Dean.
He's a very nice man. It was very
awesome. So highly recommend you tune in for that episode. But if you enjoyed today's episode, please do take the time to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your favourite podcast app, as that allows us to continue to get great guests on the podcast.
And of course, you can always get in touch with us if you would like in a variety of ways. You can send us an email, which is podcast@rightgear.co.uk, or you can find us across a variety of social media. We're on all of them. Unfortunately for Marco.
All the important
ones anyway.
And some unimportant.
And you can find us by searching for @UKPage1 on all of those various social media platforms.
Apart from Mastodon, which is writing.exchange/page1pod.
It's called
but the rest of them.
That's right. I knew there was one which was different. That's Mastodon.
Yeah, but yes, please do get in touch if you want to let us know about the past episodes or have suggestions for future guests as well. That's always good to hear as well. And otherwise, have a great week, and we'll speak to you again next week.
See you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is @UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.